Looking back, I often wonder how my life might have turned out if I hadn't accepted an invitation to that fateful business seminar in New York. It was there, amidst the clinking of glasses and polite laughter at a corporate mixer, that I first caught a glimpse of Lisa Gravois. She wasn't the center of attention, yet her mere presence seemed to cast a magnetic pull over everyone in the room. I was captivated, though the thought of speaking to her seemed laughable. She appeared so far out of my reach that it felt futile to even try. My career at the time was on the rise. I was a young software salesman with an impeccable track record, earning respect among colleagues and competitors alike. A chance conversation with a mutual acquaintance at that same event led to my introduction to Lisa. Though brief, our exchange left me stunned. Her sharp wit and understated elegance were disarming, and for the first time I allowed myself to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, I could be part of her world. Lisa's background, however, was an entirely different story. Raised in opulence and groomed to take her place within her family's perfume empire, she had lived a life that most people could only dream of. Her rebellious streak, though, had earned her a reputation for challenging the traditional expectations of her family. While her brothers seamlessly fell in line with their parents' vision, Lisa's defiant independence made her both a source of frustration and fascination for those around her. Our courtship wasn't without its challenges. Lisa's parents, staunch in their belief that I wasn't good enough for her, made their disdain abundantly clear. Every dinner, every event, every encounter with her family carried an undertone of judgment. Lisa, to her credit, seemed unfazed by their disapproval, brushing off their remarks with a confidence that left me in awe. It was her unwavering choice to be with me that eventually gave me the courage to ignore their disdain. The prenuptial agreement, as contentious as it seemed at the time, became the linchpin that allowed our union to move forward. Lisa's insistence on a no-children clause surprised me, but didn't deter my commitment to her. I chalked it up to her upbringing. Her family valued legacy through wealth and enterprise, not necessarily through offspring. Although I yearned to one day be a father, I set aside my dreams, convincing myself that love would be enough. For 3 years, our marriage was everything I'd hoped for. We traveled the world, attended glamorous events, and lived a life of luxury that still felt surreal to me. Yet, beneath the glittering surface, cracks were forming. Lisa's frequent absences for work began to take a toll on our connection. While I chose to believe that her passion for her career was the culprit, subtle signs began to emerge that something else was amiss. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a photograph in a newspaper gossip column that I realized just how much of our life together had been built on half-truths and hidden secrets. I stepped into the house after a grueling day at work, only to be met with a fury I had long anticipated. My wife of 12 years, Lisa, stood waiting, her face a mask of rage that broke into a storm of accusations as soon as the door shut behind me. This confrontation, though dreaded, was something I knew couldn't be avoided forever. Admittedly, Lisa had ample cause for her anger. I had been unfaithful. Yet before condemning me too quickly, consider this. Lisa's own betrayal came first, lasting over 6 months before I began my own indiscretions. While I had been aware of her affair for years, it was only now that she uncovered mine, igniting the firestorm that had been brewing beneath the surface of our relationship. The moment I stepped into the house, she screamed at me, "You pig!" From there, things spiraled downhill. Looking back, I think those were the kindest words she threw my way during her tirade. Although I barely caught every third word, it was crystal clear she had uncovered my secret affair, and she was livid. Even if I could have squeezed in a response, I wouldn't have known what to say to diffuse her fury. So I just stood there, staring at the floor, waiting for the storm to pass. Eventually, her anger ebbed and she demanded, "What do you have to say for yourself? Should I just file for divorce?" In a quiet voice, I replied, "Well, for starters, I've known about your affair for the past 9 years. So yes, maybe divorce is the right step." "What?" she gasped, her face losing all color. "What are you talking about?" Calmly, I opened my briefcase, pulled out a set of photos, and handed them to her. Evidence of her infidelity. I had no idea how she'd react, but what happened next caught me off guard. Lisa, who is wealthy enough to bury me in a mountain of legal trouble, didn't explode as I expected. Instead, she dropped the photos, burst into tears, and looked at me with such anguish that it left me speechless. "I don't want a divorce," she sobbed. "I love you." Then she fled to our bedroom, leaving me utterly confused and even more uncertain about our future. Lisa is the most beautiful woman I've ever met. Even in my wildest dreams, I never imagined I'd end up married to someone like her. When we tied the knot, I assumed she'd eventually grow tired of me and cast me aside within a couple of years. One unusual aspect of our marriage was a prenuptial agreement her extremely wealthy family insisted upon. I had no issue with most of its terms, but one clause nearly made me walk away. Lisa demanded that we have no children. Despite my reservations, I agreed. I was deeply in love with her. Ironically, by the time this story unfolded, I had 4 children. Life, it seems, had taken a turn I never expected. Did I mention my life feels like a complete wreck? A bit of context might help. My wife, Lisa Gravois, comes from an incredibly affluent family. I'm David Todman, by the way. Lisa never took my last name. Her family's name is a luxury brand, synonymous with their world-renowned perfume company, Gravois Scents. As a co-owner of the business, it made perfect sense for her to keep her maiden name. Initially, I wasn't thrilled, but over time, I came to appreciate the separation it created. Since we don't share a last name, many people don't even know we're married, which affords me a level of anonymity. When we got married, I couldn't believe Lisa had chosen me. She's breathtakingly beautiful, with long black hair, piercing blue eyes, and a model-like figure with just a touch more curves. She even worked as a model in her teens. I look decent enough, sandy-haired and fit, but Lisa is in a completely different league. We met at a party in the Hamptons, hosted by my college roommate and his wife. My roommate was a successful commodities trader, and his wife, Beth, had been close friends with Lisa since their days at Vassar. When I was introduced to Lisa, I was floored by her beauty, as was every other man in the room. She exuded confidence and allure, leaving the single men, and quite a few married ones, enraptured. But I knew she was out of my league, so I didn't linger. Instead, I mingled with other women at the party, following a friend's advice. Stick to women in your league, or you'll waste your time chasing someone who's about to leave with someone else. Yet no matter where I went, Lisa seemed to appear by my side. At first, I thought it was coincidence. By the 4th time, it was obvious she was interested in me. While I was flattered, I also felt uneasy. I assumed she was just looking for a fling and would discard me when the novelty wore off. I wasn't keen on being someone's temporary plaything. And yet, here we are, 12 years later, with a marriage that feels like it's on the verge of collapse. Maybe this was her plan all along, but I didn't let myself dwell on it. After that party, though, Lisa began pursuing me relentlessly. Look, I'm a decent guy, but what could someone like Lisa Gravois possibly want with me? I was just a software salesman, not that I wasn't good at it. In fact, I excelled at my job and had worked my way up to a senior sales director position in just 4 years, earning a respectable $5,000 a month. But that was pocket change compared to Lisa's income. She brought in $40 million a year before bonuses. So naturally, I assumed she was toying with me. Ironically, my aloofness seemed to make her more determined. She was relentless, and after 4 weeks of persistence, she finally convinced me to go out with her. It took 6 months before we slept together and over a year before we tied the knot. Our wedding was a jaw-dropping display of extravagance. 600 guests attended, and I heard the whole affair cost about $6 million. Unsurprisingly, her family insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Lisa was clearly uncomfortable broaching the subject, but I had no objections. I understood their reasoning. Besides, I wasn't after her money. I made a decent living on my own. Still, when I agreed to sign, Lisa seemed overjoyed. She admitted her family would cut her off if she married me without one, but as she assured me, she was determined to marry me no matter what. That didn't stop me from wondering how long our marriage would last. The prenuptial agreement stipulated that if we divorced within the first 3 years, I'd receive only $500,000. I couldn't believe the word only was used in reference to $500,000. The terms improved slightly after that. For every additional year we stayed married beyond 3 years, I'd earn another $500,000, prorated if necessary. Additionally, neither of us could claim any of the other's assets in the event of a split. All that aside, the best part of the deal was that I got to be with the most stunning woman in the world. And if she decided to kick me out, at least I wouldn't leave empty-handed. One of the most unusual clauses in the prenup was an agreement that we would not have children. Although I eventually accepted it, this condition didn't sit well with Lisa's parents. But Lisa's relationship with them was strained, to say the least. She told me they barely interacted outside of board meetings and that they preferred her brothers. Lisa had already clashed with them about the no-kids rule long before we met, so their disapproval wasn't a shock. Unsurprisingly, we've had little to do with them over the years. On the rare occasions when Lisa's parents visited, it was uncomfortable. They looked at me like I was less than nothing. For the first 3 years of our marriage, though, life was amazing. I truly believed Lisa loved me during that time, but shortly after our 3rd anniversary, I discovered she was having an affair. Our relationship had always been unconventional. Lisa traveled extensively for work, about a week out of every month. Early on, I sometimes accompanied her on these trips, but those opportunities became rarer as time went on. Occasionally, she'd be home for several consecutive weeks, but those stretches were the exception. Yet, whenever she returned from a trip, she was insatiable, and our intimate life remained passionate. The truth began to surface when I saw a photo in the gossip section of the newspaper. Lisa's celebrity status often landed her in these pages, so I scanned them regularly. One day, I nearly missed it, a photo from a party in Paris. In the corner of the image, I spotted someone who looked like Lisa. I grabbed a magnifying glass to be sure. Why was this such a big deal? Because Lisa was supposed to be in Japan on business at the time. There could have been a logical explanation, maybe a last-minute schedule change. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and I needed answers. When we first got married, Lisa suggested I quit my job to travel with her full-time. I refused, telling her I didn't want to be financially dependent. Eventually, she stopped asking. One perk of being married to someone like Lisa was access to endless resources, but I avoided using her money, knowing how closely she tracked her finances. Thankfully, I had my own income, which I mainly spent on gifts for Lisa, an exhausting challenge given that she already had everything. As my suspicions grew, I became consumed with worry. Sleep and food were afterthoughts. I needed clarity. Using my own funds, I hired a private investigator. I chose a firm in St. Louis, one I knew Lisa's company had never worked with. By this point, Lisa's travel schedule had increased. She was away about 2 weeks each month. Oddly, despite her absences, our physical relationship remained fiery. She seemed genuinely upset whenever she had to leave and overjoyed upon returning. For a while, I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. A month later, I received the investigator's report, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. The truth was devastating. The report confirmed that Lisa's lover was Gerard Lovell, whose family held a powerful legacy in European banking. The Lovells owned a network of banks, and Gerard served as president of their holding company. He and Lisa had known each other since childhood, and at one point, everyone assumed they'd marry. But their relationship ended. Lisa married me, and Gerard tied the knot with Teresa Apopoulos, the daughter of a Greek shipping magnate. Together, Gerard and Teresa had 3 children. The report went into painful detail. Apparently, Gerard and Lisa had split because Gerard wanted children, and Lisa adamantly didn't. His family had even threatened to disinherit him if he agreed to her terms. Then I read something that made it all click. Gerard's wife had passed away 6 months earlier. With Teresa gone, nothing was stopping Gerard and Lisa from reigniting their relationship. For 5 days, I was a mess, trapped in a fog of sadness and confusion. Gerard had been Lisa's first love, and it was clear their connection had been reignited. What I couldn't understand was why Lisa hadn't left me. Whenever she came home, she was all over me, loving, attentive, even passionate. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed she truly cared for me. She seemed overjoyed to see me, and our time together in bed was as intense as ever. But as messy as things already were, they were about to get worse. When I first read the report, my gut reaction was to confront Lisa and demand a divorce. But after taking some time to think, I found 3 reasons to stay. First, I was still in love with Lisa, despite everything. Second, our physical relationship was undeniably amazing. And third, there was the financial incentive. Thanks to our prenuptial agreement, I earned roughly $1,370 for every day I stayed married to her. From a purely practical standpoint, it wasn't a bad deal. I decided to hold off on making any decisions until Lisa returned from her next trip. In the meantime, a reckless thought began to take root. If she was cheating on me, maybe I should do the same. Even then, I wasn't sure I'd actually go through with it. As I mulled over my options, Thelma Johnson, one of my sales associates, came into my office. Thelma was attractive, maybe an 8.5 compared to Lisa's 11. She had a great figure, a kind demeanor, and was an excellent salesperson. Recently divorced, she'd caught her husband cheating, but didn't seem particularly heartbroken about it. "You've been off all week," Thelma said. "Anything I can help with?" I liked Thelma and respected her work ethic. That day, I decided to open up to her. "I just found out Lisa's been cheating on me," I admitted. I don't know whether to confront her or just ignore it. "Easy," Thelma replied bluntly. "Divorce her and move on." "It's not that simple," I countered. "I signed a marriage contract. For every year I stay married, I get $500,000. That's about $1,400 a day, not exactly chump change. I laid out the other perks of being married to Lisa. Luxury cars, designer clothes, lavish parties, private jets. Thelma listened thoughtfully and promised to think it over. The next day she returned to my office, shut the door, and sat across from me. "I think I've got a solution to your problem," she said. "Oh? And what's that?" I asked, curious. "Stay married to Lisa," Thelma suggested, "but with a twist." I raised an eyebrow, amused. "A twist? Do tell." She smiled knowingly. "Stay married, but have an affair." I started to interrupt, but she held up a hand. "Hear me out," she said. "Just let me explain." I leaned back in my chair, gesturing for her to continue. "All right, Thelma, the floor's yours." "You're torn for 2 reasons," she began. "First, you still love Lisa, even after what she's done. Second, you want children, something Lisa will never give you. Having an affair alone won't solve that. Sure, you could get a mistress pregnant, but that would blow up your marriage." I nodded slowly. "True. So what's your point?" She hesitated for a moment before dropping her bombshell. "I think I could be the solution," she said, flashing a warm smile. I blinked. "What? Are you saying you want to be my mistress?" "Not just your mistress," she replied with a sly grin. "I want something more." I frowned, unsure of where this was going. "I'm not sure I like the sound of this." "Just hear me out," she insisted. I motioned for her to continue. "David, you've known me for years. Longer than you've known Lisa," Thelma said. "You've always thought Lisa was out of your league, but I never saw it that way. She's lucky to have you, and she's an idiot to risk losing you. But since she's made her choice, I'm not going to let this chance slip by." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I've always been attracted to you, but I knew I couldn't compete once Lisa entered the picture. Now, though, things are different. You want children, and I want children. Lisa has hurt you, and I want to help you heal. Here's my proposal. Become my lover. I'll keep things discreet so you can stay married to Lisa, but I'll give you the children you've always wanted. You get to keep your life with Lisa and fulfill your dream of being a father. We both win." I stared at her in stunned silence as she awaited my response. I won't lie. I was both shocked and intrigued by Thelma's proposal. It sounded absurd, but part of me couldn't help being drawn to the idea. Still, I could see potential challenges, and I began to lay them out. "First, thank you for even suggesting this," I said sincerely. "I'm genuinely flattered. It's far more than I could ever expect. But there are some issues. Finances could be complicated, then there's raising and naming children, and what if down the road you decide you want to get married?" Thelma nodded. "I thought about those problems too, but I think I have solutions. Financially, I own my house, and all I'd ask is that we split the cost of raising the children. Your name would be on their birth certificates as their father, but unless you want otherwise, they'd take my last name. As for marriage, I don't see myself wanting that again, but I'm realistic enough to know I can't predict the future. So I'd suggest we draft a written agreement with a clause allowing either of us to end things with 6 months' notice. If I get married, you'd have the right to decide on custody. If you terminate the agreement, I'd keep custody, but you'd still have generous visitation rights. Either way, you'd always be recognized as their father." We sat in silence for a while, each processing what the other had said. Eventually, I broke the quiet. "I have to admit, your offer is intriguing, but I'm not ready to commit to anything like this yet. How about we start by going on a few dates and see if we're compatible?" Thelma agreed, and we began casually dating. Our first few outings were simple, dinner and dancing. Later, we added theater trips to the mix. I quickly realized that spending time with Thelma was enjoyable. She was warm, funny, and easy to talk to. It was a far better use of my evenings than sitting alone at home, waiting for Lisa to return from her endless trips. On our 5th date, we shared a long, tight embrace in my car as I dropped her off. By the 6th, Thelma turned to me and said, "We're definitely compatible on dates. Now let's find out if we're compatible in bed." Lisa had always been electrifying in bed, so I wasn't sure what to expect with Thelma. As we undressed, I noticed that she was even more attractive than I had imagined. While shorter and curvier than Lisa, her body was soft and alluring. That night, we didn't stop at just 1 round, or even 2. By the time I went home, I expected to feel guilty about cheating on Lisa. But I didn't. If anything, my time with Thelma soothed my bruised ego. The next day, Thelma strolled into my office, radiant. She closed the door, walked around my desk, and kissed me passionately. I think last night proved we're compatible. So what's the next step? Grinning, I replied, why don't you find a lawyer, not connected to this company or leases, to draft an agreement? Then we'll take it from there. She beamed. I know just the person, my brother Tim. He's a great lawyer and someone I trust completely. He even warned me not to marry my ex-husband. With that, Thelma left, and I returned to work. Over the next few days, I thought less and less about her proposal. Since she didn't bring it up, I assumed she had decided against it. Honestly, I wasn't planning to revisit the subject either. By then, I was leaning toward divorcing Lisa outright and accepting the financial hit. At least I wouldn't end up like so many other husbands, financially ruined. I knew I'd still walk away with a decent amount. 2 weeks later, Thelma surprised me by walking into my office and placing a completed contract on my desk. Take your time reviewing it, she said. Make any changes you want. If we both agree, we'll sign it in front of my brother. We'll have witnesses and a notary. I was stunned. She hadn't mentioned the idea since our night together, and we hadn't gone out since then either. I'd assumed the whole plan was off the table. Yet now, here it was, an actual agreement in black and white. Almost instantly, my thoughts shifted back to the idea of taking Thelma as my mistress and having children with her. Tim, her brother, turned out to be incredibly thorough. He brought up questions Thelma and I hadn't even considered. One, in particular, struck me deeply. What would happen to the children if something happened to Thelma or me? The question sent a chill down my spine. Tim, however, had a clear solution. If Thelma passed away, he and his wife would raise the children unless I wanted custody. If I was still with Lisa and chose not to take full custody, I'd still have unlimited access to the children, and they'd be informed that I was their father. If I died, the children's last names would be changed to mine, and my assets would be placed in a trust for them until they turned 25. As I read through the agreement, I realized how serious Thelma was. For the first time, the idea of building a life with her and creating a family began to feel real. I was still wrestling with my decision when Lisa mentioned on Monday that her travel schedule would increase next year. That was the final push I needed. The very next day, I told Thelma to schedule a meeting with her brother Tim to finalize things. Tim, a sharp and pragmatic attorney, approached the meeting with a professional demeanor, though it was clear he deeply cared for his sister's happiness. "David, you're a lucky man," Tim said, shaking his head with a wry smile. "Your wife is stunning, and my sister's gorgeous too. I'd say you've hit the jackpot." I laughed, but Thelma gave her brother a look. "Tim, don't forget that Gloria is a fantastic woman, and you're lucky to have her." "I know," Tim replied, chuckling, "but a deal like this? Even Gloria would be jealous. Just kidding. She's more than enough for me." Satisfied with his response, Thelma smiled, and we returned to the matter at hand. One part of the agreement stipulated that Thelma and I would plan our intimate encounters around Lisa's business trips, adjusting early on to align with Thelma's most fertile periods. At the office, Thelma and I maintained a strictly professional relationship. She even openly told colleagues she was done with dating and planned to have a child through artificial insemination. 3 months after we first slept together, Thelma called to tell me she was pregnant. We maintained a physical relationship during her pregnancy, as best as her condition allowed. When Thelma went into labor, I couldn't be there, as Lisa was home. Still, I rushed to the hospital as soon as possible to meet my son, Gavin, whom we had named after her grandfather. 18 months later, our daughter Jennifer was born. Shortly after, Thelma asked if she could become a stay-at-home mom, explaining she had saved enough to last 5 years, until both children were in school. I was thrilled and offered to cover her mortgage and utilities through a fund I'd quietly set aside. We hadn't planned on having another child, but during one of Lisa's trips, Thelma miscalculated her ovulation period. Tearfully, she called to tell me she was pregnant again. She feared I'd be angry, but I reassured her that I loved her and all our children. This time, I was lucky enough to be present in the delivery room when Scotty was born. I was so overjoyed that I floated on cloud 9 for days. Before Scotty's birth, Thelma and I agreed it was time to prevent more pregnancies. After some discussion, we decided to leave it to a coin toss. Thelma would have her tubes tied if it landed heads, and I'd get a vasectomy if it was tails. The coin came up heads, and Thelma underwent the procedure. For a while, life seemed to settle into a comfortable rhythm. Then Lisa's travel schedule was abruptly cut back. This threw a wrench into my arrangements with Thelma. If Lisa wasn't traveling to see Gerard, I felt hypocritical sneaking away to see Thelma. As nonsensical as it seemed, the change disrupted everything. When Lisa canceled her trip, She appeared genuinely happy, which made me feel relieved. Thelma, however, was thrilled at first. But as the weeks passed, both women began to grow increasingly frustrated. Lisa wanted to spend more time together, insisting we needed to reconnect. Meanwhile, Thelma was upset that we hadn't been intimate in nearly 6 weeks. Although I continued to sleep with Lisa, my guilt often affected my performance. My life was unraveling, and I felt powerless to fix it. Then one evening, I came home to discover that Lisa had found out about my infidelity. She confronted me, and instead of denying it, I finally said, "You're right. Maybe we should just get a divorce." Lisa's reaction shocked me. She stared at me, then burst into tears. "I love you. I don't want a divorce," she cried before running to the bedroom. I followed her, confused. When I found her lying face down on the bed, sobbing, I sat beside her and pulled her close. "You were right, Lisa," I said gently. "We've been drifting apart for years. I thought you wanted a divorce." "No," she choked out. "I don't want that." "Then why bring it up?" I asked, completely baffled. "I thought it would wake you up, make you realize we need to fix our marriage," she admitted between sobs. "Oh," I murmured, struggling to find the right words. Finally, I confessed. "Lisa, I've known about your affair with Gerard for years. I assumed you were ready to leave me and be with him." Lisa gasped, her face pale with shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "At first, I was so hurt that I was ready to confront you and ask for a divorce," I admitted. "But over time, I realized I'd only hurt myself financially, and honestly, I still loved you. But the pain was overwhelming, and I was almost ready to file for divorce. Then someone at work gave me another idea." Lisa's tear-streaked face showed pure bewilderment. She had no idea I knew about her affair or that I had been unfaithful myself. "So you have a mistress," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "You're cruel. Get out of here and leave me alone." For the first time, I realized the full scope of the damage we had done to each other. With every passing moment, the situation grew more surreal. Why on earth was Lisa furious with me for having an affair when she was the one who started hers? Taking this as my chance to escape the madness, I decided to spend some time with Thelma and the kids. When I arrived at Thelma's, she pulled me into the bedroom before I could even explain what had happened. Afterward, we finally talked. "I thought you'd lost interest in me," she admitted softly. "With Lisa being home all the time, I started convincing myself that I didn't need you anymore. But honestly, I was going crazy thinking about life without you." I filled her in on the strange encounter with Lisa and her emotional outburst. To my surprise, Thelma began to cry. "Why are you upset?" I asked when she had calmed down a bit. "It's obvious Lisa still loves you deeply," Thelma said, her voice trembling. "She'll do whatever it takes to keep you." "That doesn't make sense," I replied. "First, Lisa told me to leave. Second, she's been happy with Gerard for nearly a decade. How could she still love me?" "I don't know," Thelma said through her tears. "But something's changed, and she clearly doesn't want to let you go. It's not fair. She's the one who left you, and I want you." Nothing about the situation made any sense anymore. In the face of it all, I kissed Thelma, made love to her again, and tried to clear my mind. By the next morning, after another round of closeness, I headed to the office, hoping to begin untangling the mess my life had become. But when I arrived at work, I found Lisa sitting in my office. Her expression told me she wasn't there for a friendly visit. "Good morning, Lisa," I said cautiously. "This is unexpected. I don't recall you ever visiting me at work. What's going on?" "You know exactly why I'm here," she snapped. "We need to talk about your affair." Realizing this wasn't a conversation to have in public, I closed the office door and sat down across from Lisa. I looked at her expectantly. "All right, Lisa, what do you want to discuss?" She didn't hesitate. "First, who is she?" I kept my voice steady. "Her name is Thelma Johnson. She used to work for me." Lisa's eyes narrowed, and her tone turned accusatory. "Did you hire a private investigator or something?" The abrupt question caught me off guard. "What? No. Why would I—" "One of my friends saw you at a restaurant the other day," she interrupted. "He said you were kissing her. Passionately. He tried to follow her but lost track." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the final blow. "So, are you planning to keep seeing her?" I could barely manage a response. "Oh, God," was all I could mutter. "Well, are you?" Lisa pressed. "Lisa, I doubt you're going to like what I have to say, but you need to hear it," I said. "Afterward, I think we'll both agree that it's time to end this marriage." Sadness flickered in her eyes, but she nodded for me to continue. If you had kept traveling as much as you were before, we wouldn't be having this conversation, I began. What do my trips have to do with any of this? Lisa demanded. I've known about your affair with Gerard for years, I said bluntly. You were meeting him on your business trips, and while you were gone, I started seeing Thelma. I figured if you could have an affair, so could I. Lisa's face hardened. Do you have a child with her? Sit down, Lisa, I said firmly. No, I don't have a child with her. I have 3. You've always known I wanted children, and you never did. Lisa sat silently for a long moment, processing the information. Finally, she stood. I need time to think this through, she said quietly before leaving. I figured it would only take a day or 2 for the company lawyers to draw up divorce papers. In the meantime, I decided it was safer to stay with Thelma while Lisa processed everything. That night, being with Thelma and the kids brought me a sense of relief, and for the first time in a while, I felt happy. The next morning, Lisa called my office. Expecting to hear that the papers were ready, I picked up the phone only to be blindsided by her request. I want to meet Thelma and your children, Lisa said. What? I asked sharply. Listen, Lisa, I know you're upset, and we can argue about whether you have a right to be, but I won't let you drag my kids or Thelma into this mess. David, I promise, she said, her voice calm and measured. I won't do anything to upset, embarrass, or hurt your kids, Thelma, or you. I just want to meet them. I'll even bring a nanny to help with the kids while Thelma and I talk. If you still want a divorce after this, I'll respect the terms of our agreement. I hesitated, considering the potential fallout. If the meeting went poorly, it could make everything worse. But it also seemed like the fastest way to resolve things. I'll need to talk to Thelma, I said cautiously. If she agrees, when and where? How about tomorrow morning at 10? At our house, Lisa suggested. When I told Thelma about the plan, she wasn't happy. If you see us side by side, you'll realize she's better than me, she said, her voice tinged with insecurity. I rolled my eyes. This isn't about comparing you two. It's the quickest way to finalize the divorce. Reluctantly, Thelma agreed, and with that, I braced myself for what was sure to be an unforgettable meeting. The next morning, I brought Thelma and the kids to Lisa's house. Thelma seemed overwhelmed by the grandeur of the estate, while the kids were buzzing with excitement after I told them about the pool, game room, and even an ice cream bar inside. Instead of walking in as I normally would, I rang the doorbell. To my surprise, Lisa herself answered the door. Typically, one of the household staff would handle it, as there were always a few around during the day. David, Lisa greeted me with a smile. This is still your home. You don't need to ring the bell. I wasn't sure what kind of welcome to expect, I replied hesitantly. Lisa introduced us to a kind-looking middle-aged woman. This is Helen, the nanny. She'll take the kids to the pool while we talk. We'll sit in the kitchen where we can keep an eye on them. In the kitchen, Lisa offered drinks. I wanted whiskey, but settled for a Pepsi, given the circumstances. Thelma asked for water, and Lisa poured herself a glass of wine. I felt a twinge of annoyance. If I'd known wine was on the table, I might have chosen differently. Lisa started the conversation with a direct approach. Thelma, David mentioned that you've been together for about 8 years. As much as we could, Thelma replied nervously. He insisted we only meet while you were traveling, but he always made time for the kids, even if it was just for an hour or 2. He never missed their parties. Lisa gave me an unreadable look. So, Thelma, you've been happy with David? Don't you want a full-time husband? David is the best man I've ever known, Thelma said firmly. He's a better part-time husband and father than most full-time men I've met. So, no, I don't want anyone else. I want what David is willing to give me. Lisa's expression softened, and I noticed a tear slip down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. She turned to me. David, could you check on the kids? I'd like some time alone with Thelma. I glanced at Thelma. Though she was visibly anxious, she gave me a small nod. I kicked off my sandals, sat by the pool, and let my feet dangle in the water as I watched the kids splash around. Regret lingered in the back of my mind. Regret that Lisa had never wanted children and had chosen infidelity. Occasionally, I glanced toward the kitchen window. At first, Lisa seemed to be doing all the talking. Then Thelma spoke, and Lisa began crying. Their conversation continued, with the 2 women taking turns. At one point, Thelma started writing something down. Eventually, they were hugging and crying together. Lisa appeared at the door and called me back inside. Reluctantly, I stood and returned to my chair, unsure of what to expect. A part of me wanted to ask if whiskey was still an option, but I thought better of it. David, Thelma said, reaching for my hand. We've come to an agreement. My stomach sank. Okay, I said cautiously. Am I going to hate this? Lisa gave me a faint smile. We'll let you decide. I leaned back, confused and bracing for impact. This meeting had started with the expectation of divorce discussions, and now it seemed these two women had other plans. I didn't understand. Look, I said, trying to steady my voice. Lisa, you've been cheating on me for nearly 9 years, and yes, I cheated too, but only because you started it. I don't understand why you're clinging to me when you could have been with Gerard. Divorce me, and you'll be free. Lisa burst into tears, and Thelma smacked my arm. What was that for? I asked, irritated. Gerard is dead, Thelma said quietly. Oh, I stammered, feeling like an idiot. I had no idea. I'm sorry. Lisa took a deep breath, wiping her eyes. David, you're right. I cheated. Gerard was my first love, and I thought I'd moved on until I met you. He ended things with me because I didn't want children. When I saw him again during my travels, he was grieving his wife's end of life. I wanted to support him through his pain, and one thing led to another. But even while I loved Gerard, I realized I loved you just as much, maybe more. When Gerard had a heart attack and passed away, he'd been pressuring me to leave you and marry him. I refused because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. I love you, David. I can't survive without you, and I know you still love me even though you've built a family with Thelma. If I can love two people at the same time, I know you can too. I understand I can't have you all to myself, but like Thelma, I want as much of you as you're willing to give. I exhaled deeply, sinking into my chair. I could almost hear men across the world envying my position, but all I could see was chaos waiting to happen. Two women wanting to share one man, disaster written all over it. I looked between Lisa and Thelma, both of whom were watching me with a mix of hope and anxiety. I decided to play dumb. So, how exactly is this supposed to work? I asked. Thelma pulled out a notepad and flipped to the schedule. The plan they had worked out was surprisingly detailed. In essence, Lisa would remain in the master bedroom, while Thelma and the children would live in the north wing, which had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. I would alternate between them, spending nights with Thelma on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and with Lisa on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Sundays were my choice. I could stay wherever I wanted. Sleeping arrangements didn't necessarily guarantee closeness, though. Whether or not we were intimate on any given night would depend entirely on mutual agreement. However, if one of them decided they weren't in the mood or unable to, I wasn't allowed to switch to the other that night. There were other rules, but this was the foundation of their agreement. I told them I needed time to think. The idea seemed far-fetched, but they insisted it was either this shared arrangement or nothing. I was skeptical. Surely one of them would eventually want me full-time. But then paranoia crept in. What if they were serious about the all-or-nothing ultimatum? Could I risk losing both of them? Conveniently, I had a business trip scheduled for the following day. I promised to give them my decision when I returned. Surprisingly, I managed to focus on my work and even closed a deal with Stellar Enterprises. But as my flight home touched down, it hit me. I'd already made up my mind. I would accept their arrangement. Thelma took the new terms to her brother, Tim, to draft an updated agreement. As she explained the situation to him, his eyes widened in disbelief. When she finished, he turned to me with mock indignation. David, I officially hate you, he said, shaking his head. I laughed, knowing he was joking. You could always find yourself a mistress, I quipped, earning a sharp slap on the arm from Thelma. Not a chance, Tim replied with a chuckle. For the first 7 months, the arrangement worked surprisingly well. My bed life didn't necessarily become more intense, but it was consistent. I was intimate with one or both women 3 to 5 times a week. With Helen, the nanny, taking care of the kids during the day, Thelma returned to work in my office. Lisa, initially wary of this, resolved the issue by offering Thelma a better-paying job with excellent benefits. Thelma now worked for Lisa and seemed genuinely happy with the arrangement. But then, just shy of the 7-month mark, I came home one evening to find both women waiting for me in the dining room. They said there was an issue with the agreement that needed amending. My stomach sank. What now? I thought. Little did I know things were about to take another wild turn. Lisa spoke first, wasting no time. David, I want to have a baby, she announced. I was stunned. Of all the possible topics they could have raised, this was the last thing I expected. Lisa wanting a child? It felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality. Lisa continued, her voice softer now. I know I always said I didn't want children, but watching you with Thelma's kids changed something in me. I see how much joy they bring you, and I want that too. I want to experience that love. All I could manage was a week. Okay. Apparently that was the magic word. Both women squealed with delight, hugging and kissing me. Then Lisa added something that sent my thoughts spiraling again. Thelma and I also agreed on another point. I shouldn't be married to you. Panic set in. Were they planning to kick me out after Lisa had her baby? I'd known they were close, but was this their plan all along? Let me get this straight, I said, my voice tight. You want me to get Lisa pregnant, and then you're both going to kick me to the curb? If that's your plan, just say so. But don't think for a second I'll let you cut me off from my children. What? Thelma exclaimed, her voice rising in shock. No, David, that's not it at all. Lisa quickly chimed in, her face flushed with embarrassment. I must have explained it badly. That's not what we meant at all. Thelma threw her arms around me. I love you, David. I'd be devastated if you left. And I feel the same way, Lisa added, tears streaming down her face. Then what are you talking about? I asked, exasperated, because none of this makes sense to me. Lisa reached for my hand. Let's all have a drink and calm down. Once we've had a moment, I'll explain everything more clearly. I promise we'll respect whatever decision you make. After my first shot of whiskey, I asked, Lisa, are you sure about wanting a child? This is a big shift for you. Lisa admitted that spending time with Thelma's kids had awakened a maternal instinct she hadn't realized she had. She couldn't ignore the desire any longer. The new agreement would adjust my time with her to prioritize her fertility cycles. 4 months later, Lisa was pregnant, and eventually she gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Charlotte. She had Lisa's striking eyes and my smile. Thelma and the kids adored her. As for the divorce, it turned out to be part of their elaborate plan to ensure Thelma's children would face no stigma. Lisa proposed that I divorce her after Charlotte's birth and marry Thelma. Once married, Lisa would use her considerable resources to retroactively adjust records, making it appear as though Thelma and I had been married when our children were born. Later, Thelma and I would divorce, and Lisa and I would remarry. If this sounds confusing, imagine how I felt living it. Shortly after Charlotte's birth, I finalized my divorce from Lisa and married Thelma. Somehow, Lisa secured the necessary documents and made everything appear seamless. When I asked why they didn't just alter the records without going through the motions, they simply replied, "That's a woman's business." I didn't argue. The only downside to Lisa having a baby was that her parents now visited more frequently to see their granddaughter. It added a new layer of complexity, as I was sure they didn't buy Lisa's story about having an assistant always present. Their curious glances confirmed as much. And the kids? When they were young, they didn't think much of our unconventional family setup. As they grew older, we explained that their mothers were close friends and that I had been married to each at different times. The finer details, those could wait until they were adults. In the end, our family wasn't traditional, but it worked, for now. The complexity of human emotions often defies simple explanations, and as our unconventional arrangement evolved, so too did the intricate tapestry of our lives. From the outside, our lives resembled a modern fairy tale wrapped in drama, but the reality was far more nuanced. Each chapter brought its own challenges and moments of reflection. Life with Lisa and Thelma was surprisingly harmonious after Charlotte's birth. While the transition to co-parenting between two households with shared custody was unconventional, the arrangement allowed us to embrace an odd sense of balance. Charlotte became the glue that bound us further. With her first smile, giggle, and tentative steps, any lingering tension seemed to dissolve in the sheer joy of watching her grow. Her innocence served as a reminder of what really mattered. In those initial months, we all found new purpose. Thelma delighted in Charlotte's company, often commenting that watching her bond with Gavin, Jennifer, and Scotty felt like healing old wounds. The older children embraced their new sibling wholeheartedly, and their giggles often echoed through the sprawling estate. As for Lisa, motherhood softened her in ways I never imagined possible. She grew more patient and introspective, a transformation that rippled through our lives. Professionally, the arrangement proved mutually beneficial. Lisa and Thelma, once wary of each other, began to collaborate on several ventures, combining Lisa's business acumen with Thelma's practical expertise. What initially began as a business relationship blossomed into a genuine friendship. They often joked that between managing their professional endeavors and our family dynamic, they'd inadvertently created the most efficient partnership imaginable. For my part, I found myself thriving in the supportive environment. The dual dynamic of being a father in two households taught me to compartmentalize and cherish the time I had with each family unit. The arrangement wasn't without its awkward moments, switching between roles of husband to Thelma and ex-husband, but still partner to Lisa. But over time, we all adapted. Even Lisa's parents, once staunchly opposed to our relationship, began to warm to the arrangement, albeit begrudgingly. Their frequent visits to see Charlotte served as an olive branch of sorts, and while they never fully embraced Thelma or acknowledged my other children, their presence added a layer of normalcy to Charlotte's life. The years passed in a blur of birthdays, milestones, and shared victories. Charlotte grew into a bright and curious child, displaying an uncanny knack for diplomacy. It wasn't uncommon for her to mediate squabbles between her older siblings, her small voice often saying, "We're all one big family, remember?" Her perspective, simple yet profound, often brought clarity during moments of doubt. As the children grew older, the complexity of our arrangement became harder to explain. We made a collective decision to sit them down and share the full story when they were ready. It was during one such family discussion that Gavin, the eldest, voiced what we had all feared. "So, who do I belong to, Mom or Dad?" The room fell silent. It was Lisa who broke the tension, placing a hand on Gavin's shoulder. "You belong to yourself," she said softly. "But you're also a part of all of us. We're not defined by labels. We're defined by how we care for each other." Gavin nodded thoughtfully, her words resonating deeply. Our unconventional family also drew attention from the outside world. Rumors and whispers circulated, particularly in social circles tied to Lisa's business empire. Yet we maintained a united front, brushing off scrutiny with humor and poise. Lisa often quipped, "Let them gossip. At least they're paying attention." As the children entered their teenage years, the challenges became more pronounced. Navigating adolescence within a blended family required constant communication and adaptability. There were moments of rebellion, awkward family therapy sessions, and the occasional outburst of frustration. Yet, these challenges only reinforced our bond. Each difficulty was met with unwavering support and love. One of the most poignant moments came when Charlotte, at the tender age of 16, asked me, "Dad, how did you and Mom and Thelma manage to make this work?" I paused, taken aback by the maturity of her question. After a moment of reflection, I replied, "We managed because we chose love, even when it wasn't easy, and because we believed that family, no matter how unconventional, is worth fighting for." That conversation stayed with me. It became a touchstone in my understanding of what we had built. A family rooted in resilience and bound by an unshakable commitment to each other. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't traditional, but it was ours. In time, the children left the nest, pursuing their dreams and carving paths that reflected the values we had instilled in them. Gavin became a lawyer, passionate about advocating for unconventional families like ours. Jennifer pursued a career in environmental science, inspired by Thelma's love for nature. Scotty, ever the charmer, followed in Lisa's footsteps, joining the family business and breathing new life into the Gravois brand. And Charlotte, with her diplomatic spirit, embarked on a career in international relations, bridging divides much like she had within our family. As for Lisa, Thelma, and me, our lives continued to intertwine. The love we shared evolved, deepening into a profound respect and appreciation for the journey we had undertaken together. We often reflected on how far we had come, marveling at the strength it took to build and sustain our unique family. In the twilight years of our lives, we found ourselves sitting together on the veranda of the estate, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The laughter of grandchildren echoed in the background, a testament to the legacy we had created. Lisa turned to me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did good, didn't we?" I nodded, smiling. "Better than good. We did extraordinary." And so our story, messy, beautiful, and deeply human, continued, proving that love, in all its forms, has the power to transform and endure.